Hello, Paul Campbell again, continuing my talk about exposure and getting it right on the Canon C100. In part 1, I talked about zebras. Zebras allow us to look at the exposure of one element in the scene, be that the highlights or skin tones. Today, I'll introduce the WaveForm Monitor, which allows us to look at the brightness of all elements in the scene at the same time. Now, the WaveForm Monitor has been around for some 70 years, since the earliest days of video and well before digital video. Let's take a look at it. Press the WaveForm button on the camera and this graph appears. At the moment, the only thing in the scene is the background, fairly evenly lit. There's a single thick line across the waveform running from 20% up to 30%. The left side of the frame is a little darker, being further from the light. That's why it starts at 20% brightness. And here is a simple white background. Again, a single line on the waveform, but higher up, indicating a higher brightness. As we can see, the frame is a little darker on the left, so the waveform runs from around 65 up to 80% brightness. So how are these shapes on the waveform created? Time for some theory. Now let's assume that this is our scene on the camera and that this is our waveform monitor. The waveform monitor goes from 0 to 100. Over here, let's make our scene just a plain background, and let's make its brightness 20%. That's not necessarily the correct exposure for this background, but it's just a number. The background looks about right when we set it at 20%. Now, let's draw a line anywhere across this background. Straight line across, if you can imagine that it's a straight line. And let's measure the brightness everywhere across that line. Now, because this is a plain background, everywhere across that line is going to be around about 20%. So now we'll plot that brightness over here on the waveform monitor. So this is 20% here, and we mark those points, and if we mark them all in, we're going to get a line across here like that. Now let's draw another line, a different position, and we'll do exactly the same thing. Measure the brightness everywhere along that line, and we're going to get the same line basically. It might be slightly different because the brightnesses will be a little bit different, so we draw another line across there, and then we do it again. Measure the brightnesses, draw a line across there where all the brightnesses are, and you can see where this is going. We keep drawing lines across, and we're always going to graph a line across here for each of those lines. And what we're going to finish up with then is possibly a fairly thick but certainly a very bright line across here, because all of those lines together make this bright. And that's what we see on the waveform monitor. If you have a look at it, it's exactly what we get. Now suppose this was not 20%, suppose this was a white background and was 90%. Well then, instead of getting the line down here, we're going to be getting it across here at 90%. We're going to get every one of those lines that we draw is going to give us a line up here at 90%. And we can see that in this example. Let's move on to something a bit more complicated. Right, now here's our scene again. And we'll make it a little bit more complicated this time. We're going to have a plain background still. And that's at 20% brightness. And we're going to stick a white card in here. And that's going to be 90%. Now here's our waveform monitor. We do the same process as before. We draw a line across here, measure the brightness everywhere along that line, and of course we're going to get that line again at 20%, as we would expect. And for every one of these lines we draw across here, for every one of these, all the way down to here, we're going to get another one of these lines on the monitor. So we're going to finish up with a fairly thick line here, fairly bright one. Now when we draw a line across here and measure the brightness starts off at 20% over to there, but when we get to here, the brightness jumps up to 90%. So we'll be plotting across here, and then suddenly we'll be plotting here at 90%. That's 100. And as we go across here, all the points will be up here until we get to here, and then the points will come down here again. So what we're going to get is a line across here, and as we draw more and more lines across here, we're going to continually get a line that goes across there, goes up to there, across here, down to here, and then across. And that continues all the way down to the bottom. So we're going to get brighter lines here, and here, and here. Now this bit in the middle is going to be a little bit less bright than these parts because there are less lines here for that 20%. So thick out to here, thinner here, and then thicker out to here, and then here another line. And that's how the waveform monitor builds up a graph from your scene. Right, let's look at something a little more complicated. Let's start with our frame. And let's suppose that in the frame we've got a very pretty girl. She's got a lot of dark hair. She's got gorgeous eyes. Sweet little nose and a very pretty mouth. Now let's suppose that she is wearing a dark top. So, and also let's suppose that the background is still that plain background. And it's at 20%. Now over here, let's see what our waveform monitor is going to look like. Note 100. Now, as before, we'll draw lines across here. Start with that one. And as we measure the brightness across that line, we see that the brightness is at 20% all the way across there. So we'd plot that 20% brightness. Then as we come down to the next line, we've still got the same approximate brightness. And the next line, same brightness. And the next one, same brightness again. Now when we come here, it's going to be the same brightness out to that point. So it'll come across to somewhere like here. And then it encounters this, which is black, really dark. So it's going to come down to a blacker area here. And that's going to go across to there. And then it's going to go back up as it comes out onto the background here. So it looks like that. And there'll be a couple of those we'd expect. And that gives us another line across here. And the next one, a few lines down here will come into the face. So that'll come across. And when it hits the face, it's going to go up to something like, we're about 70%. It's going to go up to here. And we'll get a line across the width of the face. That might be, let's move that over a little bit so that, because that's where the shoulder was, so the side of the face might start there. And that goes across till it comes off the other side of the face onto the background. And then it's along here again. And we get a few of these doing roughly the same thing. So we've got lines here, and they go up here and across here. And the one that comes in here, obviously go across here, and it'll go only about there maybe, you know, and then across here. Because that's down here, it's going to be under the chin, it's going to be less bright. Yeah, I'm getting a bit fancy. Now we go across here. Again, it's still the background. It hits the black shirt. It's going to go down. Down to here, black. And across. And back up and across there. Now you probably won't see these lines going down. So just sort of remove those. And we've just got these lines here. And then, you know, as we keep going down here, we keep getting, coming across here, going down, across there, and up and across. Now, suppose we put a hat on, big hat, and this hat is of course black. What difference is that going to make? Well, when we encounter the black up here, we're going to see it down here. So it's going to just appear on this black line across here. Don't make the mistake of thinking that, and this is easy to do, I mean it's intuitive, that when we put the black hat on here, we expect to see something up here. But it's not up there because it's black. Up here is where the brightnesses go. The black is going to show down here in this black area, this area of blacks. Now, these vertical lines that I've drawn in here, we possibly wouldn't have those on the waveform monitor. They might appear there faintly, maybe, but we'll just leave them out. So what we'll get up here for the hair, sorry, for the face, I'm making that mistake. I'm thinking that that's the hair. It's not. This is the brightness of the face up here. And as we come down into the neck, we might find that there's some brightness there as well. It would be sort of less bright down here than it is up there, possibly. So I have this area of brightness up here for the face. Now, I hope that makes the waveform monitor a little clearer. We go on and have a look at some real examples of the waveform monitor instead of my sketches. Before I go on, can I ask you to take a moment to subscribe? It takes but a second or two, but it means a lot to me and it helps me produce more videos. Okay, on we go then with some simple scenes and the accompanying waveforms. First example, keeping it really simple, a white card covering the background on the left. As we might expect, we get a combination of the waveforms for the background and for the white card. Every line we draw across sees roughly the same thing, So we get these two lines. Again, the white card is darker on the left, so the line curves upwards and then drops down to 30% for the background. Now in this example, the white card covers the full width of the frame, but it leaves the background visible at the top. And now of course we get two lines on the waveform all the way across, one for each brightness. They're curving upwards again as the frame is, as before, darker on the left. Now Vanessa returns, but being a little shy, she's facing away from the camera, so all we can see is the dark hair. On the waveform, there is still the band across at 20 to 30% brightness for the background, and then there's another band at 10% representing the darker hair. Now she faces the camera. The background, as always, is still there, but now we can see the band at 10% representing the hair and the black band at the bottom of her neck. Up at 60–70%, an area represents the brightness of the face. Now watch closely as the hat is brought in. See where the brightness of the hand appears and disappears, and how the presence of the hat makes very little difference to the brightnesses at the 60–70% level. The hat is sitting down in the 10% area because it's black. Interpreting the waveform monitor takes practice, but it's an incredibly powerful tool, allowing you to assess the brightness of every element in your frame. With more complex backgrounds, interpretation can be challenging though, but at the very least you'll be able to ensure that you're not overexposing or underexposing, and you'll be able to place critical tones where you would like them to be. In my next video, I'll explain the use of grey cards with the waveform monitor. Until then, this is Paul Campbell, signing off.